Good evening. It is 7 o'clock on, I believe it's December 8th. This meeting of the Acton Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth and the local state of emergency declared by the Acton Board of Selectmen and Board of Health due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the Board of Selectmen have suspended all public gatherings, and in accordance with the Governor's order, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The Governor's order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations and or committee votes of the meeting. Ensuring access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment at the beginning. This meeting is convening by the video conference via the Zoom app as posted in the meeting agenda, town's website calendar, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. And please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in colloquy with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. All right, the first item is citizen concerns. And I do not see any indication that any citizens have concerns right now. So we will move on next to our discussion on the reserve policy. Christine, would you like to take over or just bring up your presentation?
Sure. All right. Strap in, everybody. Last time we didn't have numbers. I have fixed that. / with help from others. So this is a proposed reserve policy, and subsequent slides, which I'm happy to move to, go through our old reserve policy, the Finance Department's reserve policy, and potential other reserve policies so we can debate and understand. Yeah, I'll read real quick.
Do you want to start our discussion here?
Oh, sorry. Sure. You wanna take over discussing, Christy?
Sure. Do we have any first impressions? Do you want to all jump into seeing the numbers?
Let's go through the whole presentation and then discuss it.
All right. So this is the math behind the policy. Every page I've got the math and then I've got a graph to follow. And this is only useful in that it shows the slight difference between our old policy and the proposed new policy, because the 3% of total Acton spending is slightly higher than 5% of municipal. And that takes us a little more in alignment with the Finance Department's numbers. So what that looks like is this. So the difference in the graph for our old policy is that the blue line would be lower. and this raises our floor slightly. But again, that brings us a little more in alignment with the finance department's policy. This applies a similar standard to what we think the schools should keep, while not combining it into one bucket, and puts their reserves here. It does not include, because they've earmarked stabilization as a way to save for a big capital project like a roof for the new Park Academy building when that's necessary. It would result in us needing them to reduce their free cash, which would not be viable for them. So for the schools portion, I do not recommend including E&D, whereas for the towns I do.
You mean stabilization?
Stabilization. Sorry, I said E&D and I meant stabilization that entire time. That's the nuts and bolts of it. And then as an addendum, and again, I've actually emailed this all to you just recently, so if you want to take a look at it more, as an addendum, I have our previous policy, which looked like that. And again, the only difference between our previous policy and the current proposed policy is the bottom of the line. And then in a thought experiment, if we tried to apply a 3 to 5% range to all four, free cash stabilization, E&D stabilization of the schools, it's just not attainable. It's so far off already that in order to come into alignment with 3 to 5% policy, both entities would be so far below a safe reserve number that it just doesn't seem valuable to try to look at them as one bucket. And then the last thing I have is simply the enterprise funds and their balances. And I propose that we make it a goal by the end of the year, the term, to understand what each of those funds has as a percentage and what it should have and what they use their fund balances for, and why they maintain the reserve levels they do. And we can decide if we have opinions about those at that time. But I don't feel like we understand them enough yet to have opinions.
Jason.
I'm fine with tabling the enterprise funds till the end of the year, so that we can dig deeper into exactly what the meaning is and what, if any, are the preconceived expectations of what those funds are going to serve. But in the back of our minds, I do think that we need to keep in mind that all of the retained earnings in those funds is a form of asset that is held by the town and should inform our overall understanding of what tax burden the average single-family taxpayer has incurred over the previous couple of year cycles. Similarly, I hear what you said about how if you take the town's free cash and the town stabilization and the school's E&D and the school stabilization, that it's so far above our recommendation. But the fact that it's the fact that it's an outlier of our recommendation does not negate the fact that that is all money that has been acquired through taxation. So it should be kept in mind, and I'm fully cognizant and fully respect that we have no say over the money that has already been handed over to the school side, other than it did come from the taxpayers of Acton to the tune of 85.34%, or whatever the number is this year, changes by a tenth or 0.2 of a point every year. So let's be cognizant of the fact of just how much money we have taken out of taxpayer pockets as we move forward. If indeed Moody's and S&P are so narrow-minded and incapable of looking at total positions of towns' capabilities, that they really only look at free cash and stabilization. And by the way, Mr. Baird, I still request that documentation. if indeed they are that narrow in their scope, then let's meet the 3%. Let's do what the town is asking us to do, which is that 3 to 5% recommendation. But judging from the other puddles of money that have been war chested over the years, I will make my push for us to be closer to the floor than to the ceiling. Thank you.
To clarify, you are recommending that we stay closer to the floor of the proposed 3% free cash plus stabilization?
Correct. Because if we're not going to take into account E&D, we're not going to take into account hundreds of thousands of dollars in retained earnings and other accounts. That is all money that I do consider to be assets of the town. And therefore, if we're meeting an arbitrary goal of 3 to 5% for S&P and Moody's, let's by all means, let's meet the letter of the law. But the spirit of taxation should be closer to the floor than to the ceiling, in my humble opinion.
Steve?
Yeah, I understand, Christine, that you distinguished the stabilization reserve from the schools as being earmarked for large capital projects and did not apply that to the towns. I would tend to agree with you, but if my memory serves me correctly, when the town established the stabilization fund, it was for capital projects. Now, so there is no real distinction in the intent. I would agree with you because the town has not actually done that. They've used it for land purchases. They've used it for small business grants. So that they have not stayed with the, well, they've used the reserves for that. Stabilization, yeah, I think they use for land purchases. But in point of fact, they were formed with the same intent, which is capital. Other than that, yeah, I don't see a issue with establishing a range of 3 to 5% on both E&D and the town's reserve. We're an advisory committee, and we have just as much power to give advice to the school committee as the board of selectmen. And if we look at the dollars that we're talking about, since 2/3 of the money we tax goes to the schools, we should give just as much of our advice to the school committee as we do to the town. So I don't see we don't have a different role. We have the same role of giving our advice to both bodies. And I kind of like that the guidelines will be the same for both.
Would anyone like to speak up before Jason does?
Very quick question, very quick statement.
Sure. Go ahead, Jason.
Just saying that the school SIP plan, which has to do with the stabilization money, is a 13-year plan that is publicly facing at all times. I would love to see something similar on the school side. I'm done.
You mean the town side?
I want to see something similar on the municipal side. I'm done.
I understand there's a 10-year plan, but I haven't seen it. So,
Anyone else? Mike? I cannot hear you.
Okay, no, then I'm muted. This whole thing with the school budgets, I think we have very little, if any, authority or influence over their budgets. I know Steve is saying, well, we can advise them. I don't think they ever asked for our advice.
doesn't mean we can't give it.
Yeah, but I think we're just spinning our wheels, though. It's numbers we have no control over. They don't report to us in any capacity. I just think it's a wasted effort. I agree with, we should have some influence over them. I just think in reality, we don't have any. Which is the way they wanted it, I believe. I don't necessarily agree with it. It's just, I think you're just opening up a can of worms if you put our numbers and their numbers together. Although that's what you need to do to get the total picture for the town. But if we have literally no impact on the creation or the reporting of the performance of their budget, except at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year. As I said, I just think we're just spinning our wheels. It's not worth the effort.
To clarify, Mike, what I'm hearing you say is that you don't think we should have a policy about what their reserve should be, their E&D.
Correct.
Okay. Isha, did I see your hand?
No.
Okay. Anyone else? Dave?
Yeah, I just want to remind the Mike and the few of us who are still around from 2014 pre-regionalization that the one thing they told us from the school committee that nothing would really change if we fully regionalized. And of course, this is exactly what we all knew was coming, was once they fully regionalized, they never ask us for our opinion again.
Dave?
My question was just more around process. Is this anything that could be filtered up through the ALG to address Mike's concerns? I mean, I haven't been privy to those meetings, but I think they're mostly a little more broader than reserve policy.
We actually have been getting everyone's feathers up by talking about reserve policy and reserve use lately.
I think just to address Mike's point is maybe historically he's right, but maybe there's an avenue to have some influence at the margin through the ALG.
Given the current situation, the policy we recommend is entirely in line with theirs. I wouldn't be inclined to bring it up at this point in time. There were a few, Christian, how would you describe it? There was some confusion or concern in the school committee after our last meeting?
Oh yeah, there was the watching of our previous discussion had led to maybe the concern that we were trying to consider school E&D in the same bucket as free cash, which isn't exactly what we were trying to do. More have a one size fits all policy potentially, but I would agree with Dave that we can make our arguments to ALG about how the budget should be addressed by applying a reserve policy to where we think E&D should be, and if it gets above that ceiling, we could push for them to use more out of their reserves before dipping into town funds or reserves.
Oh, certainly. If in that regard, Mike, what do you think about having a policy for that sort of guidance?
Do it again.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, I just have to unmute. Well, I would agree. We can, you're saying we can lead by setting an example, I'm 100% on board with that. But, our bonding agency is different than theirs, or they're measured differently than we are. And I just think, we have enough to do. Because if we started digging into the weeds of their budget, any aspect of their budget, it could be a challenging times for all of us. I just think it's you're setting a precedent that doesn't need to be set, in my opinion.
To clarify, what is your concern?
No, well, as I said initially, when you talk about percent of reserves and E&D and so on, or at least our policy. If we set our own policy, we're leading by example. That might pressure them to do the same. And I think their policy is monitored very, very closely by the bonding agencies and by the town and the superintendent. They are accountable to everyone except to us. They are not accountable to us. So I just think we're creating a relationship. Well, there should be a relationship, but there's no legal requirement, for them to report, to answer to us in any way. And I just think, no matter, how I think it's necessary, it just in reality, I just don't think it's going to happen.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Jason?
Mr. Majors, they absolutely are accountable to us. That is the entire purpose of the ALG process. The ALG sends 2 members from the school committee, 2 members from the school administration, 2 members from the board of selectmen, 2 members from the town, as well as 2 members of the finance committee. Any one of those 10 people has the prerogative to stop consensus. It is absolutely appropriate for the school committee, for the taxation component of the school district, to take into account the recommendation of the 2 towns' finance committees. I am nowhere near as dire as you are. I believe that they actually do pay attention. That's why they have seats at the ALG table. I remember when a member of the school committee said about 5 years ago that the school district doesn't need to pay attention to the towns. We just send them a bill. And I believe that most people in both finance committees sat back and said, this is not the path we wish to go down. To say that we are just going to fork over taxation to the school committee, the school district, without recommendation, without point of view, I believe is an absolute abdication of our responsibilities. And I am not prepared to give up that level of input and advice and consent from the Acton Finance Committee. That is the entire purpose of ALG. And play it out logically. Say we get an absolutely ridiculous request from the school district that says that we have to have a 7% override. Do you really think it's our responsibility to say, well, the school district forced it upon us, we absolutely must acquiesce? I refuse to accept that. That is not appropriate. That is the entire purpose of the ALG process. It is also the entire purpose on why we are allowed to stand at town meeting and make our recommendation as a committee about the appropriate level of taxation against our citizens for the services that we choose to provide, both as a municipality and as a school district.
Mike, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I'm just saying we don't set their policy, period.
Adam, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, so my question was, after Mike's statements, which perhaps a bit naive as a new member of the FinCom, is who is the school committee accountable to for the tax dollars that they spend?
The voters?
Ultimately, town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's only through the process of town meeting that the taxpayers would be able to rebut their budget, limit their budget, claw back any money from their budget. Is that correct? The town can't go and do it. The Board of Selectmen can't go and do it. The FinCom can't do it.
Correct.
Except that we can not come to consensus at ALG. And if we don't come to consensus because we believe that their budget is too high, they have a choice to go back and try to alter their budget or to take it to town meeting without our approval.
Got it. Thank you.
We don't have to support any of the budgets. What's interesting to me about the idea of having the recommendation policy for the schools is that they can't go above the ceiling, which to me is when it gets interesting. You're saying, okay, they're holding too much taxpayer money. So if you're above the ceiling, we'd want them to spend it down. We can do this, and what we're going to have to be doing is arguing if we think their E&D is dropping too low. So for me, it's a decision right now about whether we think we want to put forth a floor on the school's E&D.
I believe they have a targeted policy of 4 to 4.5% currently. I would like to hear from somebody on the school committee, but I believe they have their own policy of trying to target 4 to 4.5% E&D. Is that accurate, Christine?
Yeah, that's accurate.
But do they have a floor?
No, that's their floor. That's actually just their goal.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought they had a goal, but I didn't know if they had a.
I'm not sure it's a
Right.
range. It's simply a try to get back there at the end of every fiscal year.
Which they are nowhere near, as I understand. My recollection is that they're ballpark 3.7%.
I'm frantically looking up the number. Give me a minute.
All right, while we're waiting, in practical sense, we don't need to put a ceiling on the schools because the state puts the ceiling of 5% on them. As far as the floor goes, yeah, there's a need for a floor. Not too many years ago, they got in some hot water with Moody's because their E&D was going down. They were using too much of it. So the concept of a floor is perfectly valid. What is 3% a good number? Yeah, probably. I think they'd start getting a little nervous if they went below it again. And just as John Mangiarotti was saying to us a few meetings ago, that the bond rating agencies were concerned about the town's reserves and use of free cash affecting the bond rating. So yeah, the concept of overuse or going below a floor is something we need to be cognizant of. And the other thing, in the final analysis, and Dave Wellinghoff probably knows more about this stuff than I do, the bond rating of the schools is a product of the underlying bond ratings of the two towns. They're not going to be whatever they are, AA something, unless Acton, no, actually, it's probably just Acton. Acton is 85% of the budget, or nearly that, and has a AAA. So therefore, their bond rating is going to be fine because the bond rating of a school district that lives off of assessments can only be as good as the people in the towns that they are assessing.
Anyone else? Okay. Does that sound good to people? Then I'm going to start with the school E&D policy idea. Are we generally, before we go to a vote, are we comfortable with having one generally?
No.
You could,
Yes, please.
well, playing games with words, you could call it reserve guidance policy or reserve guidance. In effect, I would agree with Mike about policy is a strong word.
Yeah.
We don't have the authority to enforce.
No, I think that's a good point. We would be awfully concerned if it went to that level.
Correct.
Roland, please. We're in that side view where I can only see 6 people at a time.
So why don't we, you click that multiple square thing and then slide
It's,
it up.
it's not working for me in this one.
Oh,
When
weird.
I'm in screen view, share.
Okay, so that might be why. So then should we change the top proposed finance committee reserve guidance? Since we don't actually set policy in the town? And if you have guidance down below in the schools, you should have guidance there as well.
So it makes sense to change it for the town as well.
I don't have a problem with that.
Works for me. I think I see a thumbs up from Sahana.
Is recommendation a better word?
A recommendation might be, yeah, maybe recommendation's fine too. Piggybacking on what Steve was just talking about with the bond rating, I am wondering, is it Moody's or whoever else is a rating agency, when they rate the school saying, okay, Acton's 85% and Foxborough's 15, if Foxborough didn't have a AAA rating and they were a notch below, do they use it as a weighted average? Or is it, taking 85% Acton, that type of thing? I don't know.
I think that was
I don't know the
Steve's
answer to that, Dave.
suspicion.
It's just a suspicion of my behalf.
In business, if you have a joint venture and you own 85% of it, usually what goes for you goes for the whole.
Right.
Oh, yeah, if you own 85%, you're the one calling the shot. So
Yeah, they got in trouble with their E&D and their bond, which affected their bond rating because they were using their E&D to balance the budget, which is not the intent.
Well, that's what they did last year.
yeah, they were using it consistently that way, though, and they were using a lot of money, and that's when the rating agencies got concerned and put them on warning.
Mhm.
And I can remember that, Steve mentioned, when before regionalization, and I was on the committee before regionalization, so yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Is this the sort of thing we should have a motion for?
Sure.
Adopting this as a formal policy?
I will move to approve the Finance Committee reserve recommendations.
Second.
Oh, hold on. I still want to talk about the town one.
Okay.
We can still discuss after moving and seconding.
Okay. Moved and seconded. My concern about the town one is that our 3%, let me pull up my numbers here. It's real easy. That 3% floor that we have is dangerously close to the 3% floor for the, hold on a second. I think I might have flipped my brain around on this. The finance department's policy regarding free cash, their floor is 3% of total Acton spending, which for 2022 is $3.285 million. With this proposed policy, the 3% of total Acton spending, which in this case is free cash plus stabilization, would have the floor be at that same number, which makes sense. That leaves a ton of money above the floor that could be spent because we've included the stabilization. There's a ton of money then below the ceiling and above the floor that would have to be spent effectively out of the stabilization fund. Are we comfortable with that? It's a lot easier for us to hit the finance policy's floor because they're just looking at free cash. And realistically, unless we want to go to a town meeting and ask for money pulled out of the stabilization fund, we're going to be hitting that floor that the finance department has.
Madam Chairwoman, may I specifically ask Mr. Barrett if the rating agencies are looking at strictly free cash or if they're including free cash and stabilization when they come up with a 3 to 5% range?
You're muted, I think, Steve.
I think he's waiting for you to
Here we go. So, good evening, everyone. Jason, that's a good question. I think we give them the ALG plan and our ALG reserves, which, as you know, includes our free cash, our stabilization, as well as Acton share of the E&D. But I could go back and check on that. But
no, sir. You said in the last meetings it does not include Acton share of E&D. I believe in the past you've said it does not include Acton share of E&D, but it does include unused tax levy capacity.
Sure. I guess my point was we try to let the bonding agencies know that we do our long range financial planning with the regional school district. So, as you know, in our model, it has free cash and stabilization. But I think you're probably right that when they profile the town purely, they would only count our reserves. But I just wanted to give you one quick comment. As the committee knows, the Massachusetts Department of Revenue Division of Local Service recommends communities maintain free cash between 3 and 5% of the annual budget. Now, that's just free cash, and it's 3 and 5% of total spending. They really don't. I don't think they really get too much into reserve policies in terms of the total definition. But so they look at 3 and 5% of free cash for the annual budget. As the committee knows, we've been kind of using a 3 to 8% policy. In that 3 and 8, the floor and the ceiling is total free cash and stabilization. But we really appreciate the thoughtful discussion on this, and I think we're getting close to moving forward at our level and trying to get a policy or target nailed down. The other thing is, I just wanted to let you know, Jason. I think it was Jason that asked. It was a really good question of Steve Noon. We're working a 10-year capital plan internally. So far, we've received over $50 million in total capital requests. So I think what you're going to see is us, similar to the schools, aligning a long-term capital plan. But thank you.
Madam Chairman, I need to ask a clarification question.
Can I just say one thing? I'm going to say one thing related to this. The November memo that we received from Manager Mangiarotti said that there was a DLS recommendation that the town have 3 to 5% of the total budget available in free cash. Does that sound correct, Steve? Okay. Yes, Jason.
My clarification was free cash plus stabilization or strictly free cash?
For what I just said?
That was strictly free cash.
Yeah.
They don't address stabilization.
And based on what you just said, Steve, about $50 million in capital plans, I think we should make this free cash and go back to the theory that the stabilization fund is there for capital projects.
Well, like I said, we appreciate the thoughtful discussion on all the definitions. And you're right. I think that the 50 million, and again, that was in request. And I think John Mangiarotti is just settling in to review those requests. But he's leading a team on a 10-year capital plan that is, well underway. And I think within 60 days, I think we'll be releasing something that will put a little more flesh on the bones, as they say.
Yeah, we're going to see that plan.
Well, I think I think John's intention was to get it out with the the budget in December, with everything being pushed back a couple of months, and things are just taking a little longer to get done, it seems. It just seems that way. So I would assume within 60 days or so, we'll be able to get that, out. But that's a question I can bring back to the House.
Mike, did you have something?
No, it's, just in relation to what Steve said. And
Which Steve?
Steve Barrett. They're working on the budget. Does that mean we're not going to have budget Saturday in early January?
Correct, sir. That means we're trying to get away from the all-day Saturday, so it might be a budget Wednesday night or Tuesday night in March.
We will be discussing the budget calendar at the ALG meeting on Thursday, Mike, so we'll have more of we'll have a date for you after that. Mr. Noon, you said something that sounded suspiciously like you might say that our reserve policy should be based just on free cash, at least for our floor.
Yeah, I think I did say that.
Okay.
That would make it consistent with DOR and consistent with what the manager wrote.
Okay, can I hear any arguments for or against that?
I don't think that's appropriate at all. I think they're removing the goalposts again. For years, we have used free cash, stabilization, and unused tax levy capacity. For this to be the first year that they say that stabilization should not be accounted for that level of resource is inappropriate.
To clarify, Jason, I don't hear them saying that. I hear us discussing that. We have talked about what their internal policy is. They have not said that what we should do.
I believe that the stabilization fund should absolutely count towards town reserves. Just because it happens to have a slightly higher threshold for spending it does not change the fact that it is taxation that is being held in reserve for future use.
Adam, I saw your hand up. Did you change your mind?
I can go ahead and make a comment. My comment is based on Steve Barrett's explanation that it is the state who recommends the 3 to 5%, and that recommendation is based on free cash alone. I think once that definition by the state has been verified, and I do seem to recall that was in the definition of the free cash recommendations from the state, then it seems to me like it makes sense to base our policy on the free cash, but then have a lower ceiling to accommodate for the fact that there is the stabilization fund out there. So to me, it makes sense to have a target of 4%, which is smack in the middle of the 3 and 5% on free cash, and then the stabilization fund is a fixed dollar amount, and it's going to decrease on a percentage basis year on year as the budget grows anyway.
Roland.
My question goes back to what Steve was just talking about with the capital plan. Several years ago, when I first was on the committee, this is going back a little ways, that town did a study, and I forget who the organization was that did it, and they did a big study. They went through all these things. We had new salt shed for like some ridiculous amount of money that we didn't really need because it looked like the things that we the Taj Mahal or something. I mean, it was ridiculous, the price. And I'm wondering if that is still in play with this whole thing too. Are they going as the town manager looked at that? Is he going off of that? Have the other departments had? Is anything to knock off that list? And those are things we don't know. I think we need to be somewhat in line with. We need to be in line. I understand Jason's argument, and also what Steve Noon said too. We should be in line with town free cash 5%, and then with the stabilization fund, we have to add that in some other way. I just don't know how to do that to get that to look the way would make the most sense. Because again, there is restriction on those stabilization funds. They have to go to town meeting to be used, etc. So I don't know how to get that in there to get it to word it correctly. That I'd like to see, and I'll defer to everybody else on that one as well.
We don't need to. Oh, Christine, go ahead.
I mean, if we're not going to count the stabilization fund towards the reserves, if the DLS doesn't count the stabilization fund for the reserves, and if that stabilization fund has sat there dormant for the entire time I've been on this committee, I'm not exactly sure what we're holding on to that 2.1 million for, and I'd much rather liquidate it and get it into free cash than have it sit there not counted and not used and just part of a reserve pool that we're just leaving there to the side, never using, never getting any benefit from.
What I was going to say is we don't need it. Similar that we have brought forward an idea about guidance for the schools. We don't need to only have a floor and ceiling simple guidance for the town. So Hannah.
Oh, okay, finally. I think you couldn't see me. I had my
No,
hand
I'm sorry,
raised for
I
my-
can't see.
No, that's okay. That's fine. I lost my train of thoughts. What I wanted to say was regarding this discussion, I do tend to agree with Steve Noon. And when it comes to what I'm looking at the screen right now, so then we actually, if we agree on removing the stabilization fund, then probably we are recommending just to have free cash in there and remove the stabilization fund from this sentence up there. Is that what we're talking about?
That's one idea.
So is there any way that we are going to, make a mention of the stabilization fund in this particular slide, or we're going to leave it out for now? Because what we've been hearing, and Christine, to your comment just now, the stabilization fund is used for capital projects, right?
Theoretically.
In theory.
Yeah, so it's technically not just sitting there because it can be used for capital projects going forward. So it is something, the town should be, we should be careful about keeping it aside, especially now that, hopefully we'll hear from the town manager, which we just heard, probably when during the budget, budget Tuesday or Wednesday, which is going to be in March, we will hear about the capital projects and the list, hopefully. Did I understand that right?
One key thing to remember, I think I'm mostly saying this for Isha, in order to get money out of or into the stabilization fund, it requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting.
Correct.
So this is not, it's not going to just be that the town will be like, okay, we're going to do this one thing this year. They could, but it's not easy access money. Christine?
I mean, I still think, that the schools created their stabilization fund to save for big capital projects. They know exactly what they're using the coming money for, but they also used it to get past the rating agencies' 5% required reserves that they're limited in by Massachusetts law. So there's a benefit for their stabilization fund, and there's a goal for it. Our stabilization fund is for capital, but for what? Again, I've never seen it touched. So it's just sitting there, and if it's actually not doing us any favors as far as reserves go, I don't understand why we're holding on to it, and I don't see why we can't shift capital spending for this coming budget to that stabilization fund and stop having it sit there to the side unused.
While I recognize what you're saying there, I think that's a slightly variant on the discussion. I think we are discussing right now just the overall policy, and what you're talking about is how to use the money.
I'm basically saying if we're not going to include it, I don't think we should still have it.
Gotcha. When, again, in the memo from Mr. Mangiarotti, it was a little confusing the way he worded it, but what he said was the town free cash is currently just above that 3% floor. And then free cash plus stabilization is actually just above 5%. And I'm wondering if we actually want which is not their policy, but if we would want a policy that is the 3% free cash is the floor and 5% free cash plus stabilization is the ceiling. But then my concern is if you have a reserve recommendation policy that includes stabilization, that if you then are saving for something, put more money into the stabilization fund, it then changes, it could impose a recommendation that you use free cash. Please, someone tell me if I'm wrong in my logic there.
Yes, you're wrong.
Thank you.
No, you're maybe confusing things. First, back to Christine. The rating agencies don't impose a 5% limit on the schools. The state imposed the limit, and then the limit is in place to prevent what Jason was talking about, which was basically over assessment. To keep the school district from assessing and just building an E&D balance. In my mind, the only difference between this town stabilization and the school stabilization is the schools have a better plan or a more detailed plan for spending it. Otherwise, they're the same. So I wouldn't necessarily want to get rid of the current stabilization fund or treat it particularly different than the schools until we at least see what the town spending plan was. I served on a committee a few years ago that kind of went by the boards with all the turnover in leadership that looked exactly at these issues. It was a joint committee between the town and the schools at the time, but we don't do that stuff anymore. Essentially, the town has the issues to develop and spend the capital on. They just haven't documented them at this point. We're building one fire station. We could probably build a couple more. There's other buildings. There's a potential that we need a new DPW building. There's a lot of things they could be spending money on. These were all identified in that study that was done, I think, 5 years ago now. So it probably is out of date somewhat. But I don't think we should combine the free cash and stabilization in our thinking. The stabilization should be there in both entities for capital. And beyond that, we should have a more liquid form of reserve that is in the 3 to 5% range of the spending. Now, I don't think, what's the town spending? Around 35 million, so 3% is only about a little more than $1 million. So they're not close to the 3% floor on a town basis.
Can I just clarify the 5% is a ceiling by Massachusetts, but what I meant was that the bond agencies require the school district to have 5% to stay in good rating, and so it's almost impossible for them to hit that number because of the Massachusetts ceiling, and that's why the stabilization fund helps them to get and keep that 5% range without bumping into the Massachusetts ceiling.
Yeah, the stabilization fund doesn't count towards the 5%.
It does for their bond rating, though. Right. It doesn't for our bond rating or our DLS rating, apparently. So it is a little different than the towns.
Steve, that 3% from DLS recommendation is for total Acton spending, not just the municipal budget.
Well, then we need to make that fairly clear.
Yes. And Christine says right there, total Acton budget.
But Town of Acton, I read that as the Town of Acton budget.
Right.
Did that say total Acton expenditure? Because we had this argument the last two meetings. If you look back to the spreadsheet that I sent 2 or 3 meetings ago, I made a very clear distinction between as a percentage of municipal budget and as a percent of total Acton spend. And the pushback that we got was, oh no, it has to be considered in light of total Acton spend.
To be clear, I think with the policy we're talking about right now, that we're talking about percentages relative to the total Acton spend. Am I on the same page as everyone?
Well, now I am, and now I'll say your numbers are a little high.
And yes, Madam Chairwoman, you are correct. That's what we got shouted down to over the last couple of meetings, which is why I absolutely want to include stabilization and free cash if we're being measured against total Acton spend.
Anyone else? Oh, come back to that, Jason. Okay, see. Please raise your hand if you want to say something or yell. Okay, we're looking at the total big number. So we're saying that because that's a really big number, the total spend of the town, it should include the 2 bigger numbers? I mean, what's the logic there, Jason?
Well, I personally feel that it should include everything, but I've been
Yep.
on the wrong side of that argument. At the very least, it should include free cash, stabilization, unused tax levy capacity, of which there is none. And I would like us to actively, and for this year, I'm prepared to let that be the end of it. Over the next year or so, I want us to actively investigate the enterprise funds.
Yep.
And either include them as part of that number, or if there is not a legitimate reason to hold that pile of money in a separate puddle, then I would like the enterprise fund to be collapsed down to the general fund, similar to what happened in the nursing service only 3 or 4 years ago. Because if indeed S&P and Moody's are so pedantic not to pay attention to the total outlook of the town budget, then we must comply with their approach to things and not have treasure troves hidden in different accounts. So for this year, absolutely, town free cash and stabilization should absolutely be included in against the total Acton spend, the $106 million number. Going forward, let's look at enterprise. Please don't ever forget that there are multiple millions of dollars in ABRSD, of which, while we may not have any policy privilege over, 85% of it came from out of our pocket, out of the Acton taxpayer pocket. So, listen, I totally respect that stabilization was meant to be for capital projects, but I've been begging for a 10-year plan for years. And meanwhile, we've also been told we can buy this and we can buy that because we've got the reserves. I'm not accepting that anymore. So I think we need to get on to the next section of this. What is written on the screen has been moved and seconded. If we need to remove stabilization, then you have to vote this down and try it again.
We are debating this right now.
Right. But I believe that town free cash plus stabilization needs between 3 and 5%. And furthermore, when we get into the actual execution of this, I believe that we should be closer to the 3% than the 5%. Because
Okay, that becomes interesting in terms of reality or execution, because between those two numbers for fiscal year 22, the 3% of total spending and the 5% total spending, there's a difference of $2.5 million.
Yep.
If we were to spend that money easily, that would all come out of free cash, and we would end up with a little more than $1 million in free cash.
I believe there is a whole nother presentation that we need to go through as we look at the execution of this.
Well, what I think coming up with a policy that is not executable is in some ways a waste of time.
Sure, but this policy doesn't say anything about spending down to 3%. That's the execution discussion.
I don't think this policy allows for anything else. If you're going to have it based on, because I'm trying to come up with a policy that doesn't interfere with the finance department policy. I would hate for us to come up with a policy that will just constantly butt up against theirs and mean that we cannot coexist in that way. If we were to add $1 million to the stabilization fund tomorrow, this policy would require us to then take $1 million out of free cash. Is that good for us? Is that what we want to be saying?
You're making the assumption that you're going to get a 2/3 vote of putting that extra $1 million in stabilization.
That's why I said if we put it in stabilization fund. I didn't say how it got there.
Then you're ignoring the reality of how town meeting works. You can't just wave your arm and say you've put an extra $1 million into stabilization.
I haven't said that that's what happens.
That's what you just said.
No, I said that we have gotten to the point where it goes in.
I'll ask the question. No, it wouldn't be a good idea, so we can stop arguing about how it got there. In my opinion, and it's only my opinion, if that top line is 3 to 5% of total Acton spending, well, first it should be stated as the total Acton municipal budget plus assessments to make it clear. But then in that case, it's double counting because you've already got 3 to 5% of the 2/3 of the budget covered under your second bullet. Now you're talking about getting too heavy in reserves. So
respectfully, that has been my argument for the last 3 meetings.
So our previous policy had a floor of municipal and a ceiling of total.
which was confusing.
Which was confusing. This proposed policy has a floor and ceiling of total. And you think it should be a floor and ceiling of municipal?
Well, getting back to Mike's comments earlier, which I didn't agree with particularly, but if we have no ability other than to influence and recommend on the schools, then I think we ought to have recommendations on both pieces individually, but I fail to see why if you will, the smaller of the two pieces, the municipal side should carry the bulk of the reserves in this case.
Could you please say that a different way?
Sure, you've got a budget or total spending that is broken down 2/3 maybe to the schools and 1/3 to the town, but in this case, we're saying to the schools, you can carry like the equivalent of 1/3 of the reserves, and the town's going to carry 2, because they're going to carry just as much in reserve because we're applying the same percentages to the overall number as the schools are applying to 2/3 the number. So I understand that if the schools use up their E&D and still have an enormous assessment, we're on the hook for the that increase. I don't know that we have to carry reserves as big as they are I mean, getting a little off the topic, when you look at reserves in the non-public sector, you tend to look less at percentages and more as potential events. And what events are we reserving against as a town? Well, there's the normal, we get caught by a surprise, and we need some money, and that's 3 to 5% of the municipal budget is free cash. And then maybe there's another event. Maybe it's the nightmare scenario that we get an assessment from the schools that's way out of the range of normalcy. Well, how much is it? I mean, is it another $1 million? Is it another $2 million? And then you specifically reserve that amount. But to say that the schools are going to carry a 3 to 5% reserve against $65 million, and the town is going to carry a 3 to 5% reserve against $100 million. To me, we've just said this recommendation is that the taxpayers carry a 3 to 5% reserve against $135 million. More than we could possibly ever spend.
Christine?
But that's what the agencies are requiring us to do. DLS is looking at our total spending and saying have between 3 and 5%. And the schools are being looked at needing their own 5%. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how we have a choice here.
DLS is not requiring us to do anything. They're making recommendations. And most towns, that school number would be in the budget that the DLS is looking at.
Yeah, Christy, may I?
So in that case,
1 second, Adam.
5% of a town's budget would include the schools. In our case, the schools come with their own reserves. It's a different animal.
Yeah, I just want to second the point Steve just made. The school is already running a budget with a 5% reserve policy. That rolls up into the town's total spending, and the percentage does not change. We should only be discussing the percentage reserve policy for the town's portion of the spending. The schools is already taken care of at the levels that we need.
But that does not comport with what Steve Barrett and John Mangiarati.
Yeah.
Then I would say that statement is somewhere incorrect or understood or misinterpreted. Otherwise, it would be a number, as you've pointed out a couple times, Jason, that it's going to be like 12%. It's going to end up being doubling the 5, which makes 0 sense to me fiscally. Makes 0 sense to me under all the definitions that have been given to me.
I think we have to be somewhere way off here. Jason, did you have an idea of what was going on?
Yes, I believe I understand. I believe I understand the parameters of this argument.
No, I'm asking because I'm lost.
Okay, so let me try and summarize this. And as multiple people will comment, I'm not good at short usage of words. In a normal town, the school was part of the overall municipal budget. Being that we're in a regional school district, we have 2 separate regulatory bodies to pay attention to. If you believe that Acton has absolutely no control over the regulatory body of the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District, then you must have a completely separate set of reserves between the 2 entities. If you believe we have some ability to adjust and point in the right direction that budget, then you do not need to double count reserves. If you subscribe to the concept that we have absolutely no control over the budget, then they need to keep 4 to 5% or 4 to 4.5% as their budget And we apparently also have to keep 3 to 5% of the total Acton spend. I believe Steve Noon, and I believe Adam, have now said that that is double counting of reserves. If it is accurate, as what has been stated by Mr. Barrett and John Mangiarotti, that we as a town have to keep 3 to 5% of the total Acton spend in any given year in free cash, and the Acton Boxborough Regional School District is recommending to keep 4 to 4.5% per their own policy, then we are up around 11% of money that has been taken out of the taxpayer's pocket and held in reserve. If we are to subscribe to the recommendation that we received in Mr. Mangiarotti's letter, that we must stay at 3 to 5%, and we are not allowed to include the Acton share of the ABRSD E&D, we are absolutely going to be way above any 5% reserve level from taxation, which is why I am recommending we be at the floor of what is required by DLS. Furthermore, I am suggesting that I would like to see evidence and proof that the rating agencies and DLS do not understand that we're a regionalized school district. Have I summed it up properly, Mr. Noon, Ms. Russell, and Mr. Nolde?
Sounds pretty good. I don't think you get to 11, but that's okay.
I got to 10.8% on the spreadsheet that I sent 2 meetings ago.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
And since we're stuck between that sort of rock and the hard place of needing the 2 buckets of reserves, I do think we should keep stabilization in our policy. And we can watch for how low we get with free cash, but that's a lot of money and we know it. And if we're looking at an overall understanding of how much money we have socked away, we don't think we should remove stabilization from our guidance.
Well, to throw a total monkey wrench into the discussion, yes, John Mangiarotti's right. We at 5% or at 3% of 100 and whatever million, then our free cash is, what is it, 3.7 million? It's not far off the floor.
Yeah.
So then I can take that ALG plan that I played around with and sent out to you earlier in the day and tear that one up. Because if that's the case, then we cannot use any reserves, period. Which means we now have, what I thought we had a big problem with spending, now we have a massive problem with spending. So I don't see how that policy makes any sense.
The finance department policy?
Yeah.
I agree with Steve.
John said when we talked about taxpayer relief, he said we can't do it because we can't use that amount of reserves. Well, I would go further at this point and say you can't use any of the free cash in the ALG plan if we need to hit that target.
Like I said, I wanted to be more sanguine and say let's include the stabilization fund. Again, I asked Mr. Barrett for a final answer. Do the rating agencies and do DLS include the 2.07 million in stabilization when they assess our reserves? If the answer is no, then we have a major problem.
Then I'll go with yes.
So the DLS wants us to just look at free cash, but the rating agencies will look at stabilization. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Barrett?
Sure. They also, the other thing too, and we appreciate all the comments from the committee. They also look at trends, and where you are now, what's your level now versus other things, but yeah, they look at a lot of different things. Oops, sorry about that phone going on.
So if we're worried about our ratings, we need to look at both numbers. And if we're worried about what the DLS thinks about our spending habits, we need to be concerned about free cash.
The corollary with the DLS concerns is also, are we putting forth a recommendation that the finance department will fund at all palatable? Or are we just, is it a no starter on the conversation?
I don't believe it's our responsibility to make life easy for the finance department. I believe it is our responsibility to make life right for the citizens of the town.
I agree with both, but trying to have a conversation that is about something completely tangential is not going to succeed. Steve?
Well, let's look at the FY22 budget. How are we going to balance it if we don't have at least $1 million to throw at reserves? It's already showing a $1.6 million deficit.
No, Mr. Barrett, in the ALG spreadsheet, there is a presumed use of 1.1 million in fiscal year 22. Where is that money coming from?
That would be coming from free cash.
And then it's going to be, the reason the next year's free cash number is up is because of the $1 million expected turnback?
Yeah, if you look at the ALG plan, it has as much to do with use versus replenishment as well. So, yeah, the plan has $1,150,000 in FY22, and then $1 million in 23 and 24.
Okay. Can someone clarify for me where we've gotten to with this? It's a ton to think about.
Well, I'm not convinced we're any closer to a policy, though we have moved and seconded mine, and I'm fine with voting it in.
Yeah, I'm going to withdraw my motion, actually.
Saw that coming.
Well, 3% of 100 and whatever it is, $9 million that we've currently got down for total spending and assessments is $3,270,000, and we have free cash of $3,753,000. So I'm well versed in the concept that we plan reserve use on the ALG plan and then replenish, but I don't know that we can, in good faith, plan to use more in FY22 than we have theoretically available if we're going to have a floor to free cash set in a policy. So I guess I'd throw it back to Steve Barrett, is if you need to keep $3.2 million for rough sake in free cash, how can we put together a budget that calls on taking that number down? Obviously, DORs they're making recommendations. They're not making law in this case. So we could do it if we want to, but my sense is should the finance department or the FinCom have a set of policy that we are probably immediately going to break with the first budget out of the box?
Well, I'm not sure I got the question exactly right, Steve, but again, we've been flying the flag of a informal policy of total reserves being between 3 and 8% of total spending. There's been, I don't disagree with you that it's tough. On one hand, part of my role is for maximum flexibility to run the company, maximum liquidity. At a free cash level of 3.7 million, I sometimes think heading into, or through this pandemic, you can't hold on to enough reserves, because you might have to start using them. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but at the ALG table, they'll absolutely be batting around how how much reserve use should be used. And I think this is all good stuff, trying to keep the books balanced as we move forward. Absolutely.
And if I can just respond to that, Madam Chair, I agree with Steve. The $1 million or so that you've got in there is probably the max we should be looking at, but that doesn't balance the budget this year. And I don't know that the other parties in the ALJ want to hear about cost reduction, because when we did bring it up, they didn't want to hear about it.
Well, you know what, I got to tell you, I think, and thanks, Madam Chair, I don't mean to jump in. I think what you're going to find, Steve, is that I'm not saying we're in a sense a state of suspended animation, but things have been pushed back, 30, 60 days. And, I think what you'll probably see moving forward, because I think you're right. I think you have to balance the books. And if we have zero untaxed levy capacity and we're kind of at our level of, local receipts where we're at, I think you either, you trim the sails. And I think more than likely that might be what you see over the next couple of months. But I think the problem is right now, John Mangiarotti reminded me of this the other day, and I almost fell down, that, a year ago, we already had his budget laid out. And, we don't right now. We're getting close, but he's facing a lot of different challenges. And so I think part of this is just the time of year you're feeling that we should have it in better shape. But I think a couple ALG or meetings from now, I think that'll probably be the case. But I think instead of being in good shape in early December, it'll probably be early to mid-February. And that's a tough pill to swallow, because all of our internal clocks are saying to get it balanced now. But I think you're right, though, that we're going to have to find a way to balance the books. Absolutely.
Christine?
Steve, you just said that your internal general policy was 3 to 8% of all reserves. Is that right?
Yes.
So not 3% of free cash, but 3% of all reserves.
That's what we've been flying under. Yes.
So if we have a 3% of free cash plus stabilization, we're in alignment with your floor.
Yeah, the floor, we're right on. Absolutely.
Steve, hold on. Steve,
This is really frustrating.
this is not in the memo from John, where he wrote all these things up from us. He said that you all were working within the DLS policy, where the floor was 3% free cash as 3% of total spend, not free cash plus stabilization.
I think John was more sharing what DLS recommends, as well as to kind of move the discussion forward. So I think the big thing is with the development of our 10-year capital plan, I think and you see how the schools, the region is funding their capital plan through stabilization. I think that might fix it. That might fix some of the vortex we're in with terminology and limits. I don't know, but I think with the town facing down the barrel of a $50 million 10-year, and these are requests only, and it's real tentative, that you might see those things pulled apart anyways over the next couple of years, and we might come in alignment there anyways. But I'd have to go back and review that memo, Madam Chair. I think but our internal policy has been 3 to 8% on total, but absolutely DLS recommends 3 to 5%.
But 3 to 8% of free cash plus stabilization on total spending.
Total spending. The reality of it is stabilization funds aren't certified. They're not.
But that's your policy, right? 3 to 8.
3 to 8.
Both.
Total, right?
Free cash and stabilization. So if we had a 3 to 5% of free cash stabilization, we would be in alignment with your policy. We would be our ceiling would be low.
The floor would be right where we are, your ceiling would be lower than ours, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I remove my proposed finance committee.
You move it again.
Second.
Hold on, Adam has his hand up.
Sorry, I was going to comment on Mr. Barrett's message that the rating agencies look at trends. And he's absolutely right, and I hadn't really considered that. And when you look at our budget for the number of years previous, before I came along, we had, I think, a lot more money in free cash than we do today. And bonding rating agencies, when they look at your balance sheets and they see, oh, look, they've got, X millions of dollars in their checking account, and then suddenly that's decreased by 50, 60, 70%. That sets off alarm bells with rating agencies. So I just wanted to reiterate that, elaborate on that a little bit from what Mr. Barrett said. Aside from that, again, I'm very happy proposing either a 3% free cash or a 4% free cash, and then again, just ignoring what's in the reserve. It's just fluff, really. It has to be voted on by the taxpayers in order to spend it.
I mean, it's all voted on by the taxpayer to spend it in the end. The stabilization requires 2/3. We get way more than 2/3 at town meeting when we pass the budget. If we wanted to spend out of stabilization for part of the budget, it would not be a problem.
I'm not sure we can say would not be a problem. Has anyone gone through that? I'm guessing we're talking to Steve Noon.
So your presentation, Christie.
I don't recall it, but I think, and Steve Barrett can back me up, when we put an article out on a warrant, actually in a motion, we specify from whence the money is coming. So whatever poor article got tagged with that stabilization as a funding source kind of winds up being a 2/3
Okay.
vote in practicality.
But it's not an explicit, we're standing here saying we want to take money out of stabilization for this, this, and this.
Usually not. No, you if you ever look at the way we put that score sheet together, each article has a funding source. And some of it's free cash and some of it's taxation and some of it's whatever. And that is read as part of the motion. And it's the motion that town meeting votes on, and it's the motion that's legally binding.
Sorry for the interruption, Christine. I heard a second for Christine's motion that are we going with the whole proposed reserve? I can't remember, the motion was so long ago.
Yeah.
Basically what's on your screen.
Everything's
This
on the
whole-
screen.
Whole recommendation. We have a second. Let's take a vote. Adam,
I would vote aye.
Christine,
Aye.
Steve.
What are we voting on?
What's on-
Town free cash flow stabilization between 3 and 5% of total Acton budget, and guidance for the schools that they have a ceiling of 5% and a floor of 3% for E&D of their total budget.
Total acting budget being defined as
Total Acton spend.
plus
Yes.
assessments. So no.
You vote no. Okay, so we've got. Do I have to keep track of this? Adam, this is your job. Are you listening to me?
Keep going, Christy. We got this.
Yes.
Okay, your job is to keep track of all the ayes and nays. So we've got you're an aye, Christine's an aye, Steve's a nay. Right, next, Steve?
Right.
Jason,
Aye.
Sahana,
Nay.
Mike,
Nay.
Isha,
Aye.
Roland,
Aye.
Dave.
I'm sorry, I'm abstaining.
Okay. I'm still thinking. I was hoping you all would take a little longer.
Well, we're 4-4 in non-count, so it's up to you, Christy.
Oh, good.
So we
the right
paid
thing.
big bucks.
So we're looking at 3 and 5% of total spend. This school one doesn't really
I think we're 3 and 5.
matter that much.
Adam, where are we?
I think I am missing Sahana's vote.
She was a nay, right,
Said-
Sahana?
Yep, she said nay.
I was
So I have 7 votes and waiting for Christine. Is that correct?
Waiting for me.
Christy, you have 3 nays and
Christy.
4 ayes? Is that
I have
right?
4 ayes, 2 nays, and an abstention.
So it doesn't matter what I vote.
Wait a minute, I'm
Is
missing.
that Adam?
You should have
I
Sahana,
don't have
Steve,
Steve
and Mike
Noon.
as nays.
Steve Noon said nay.
I'm a nay.
So that's
a quick question. I know Isha, I don't want to put you in a spot, but can Isha vote? Isn't she?
Her vote doesn't count. Good point. But she
Yeah, thank you.
She can
Because I
share
was
her.
there once, so I know how it feels.
Good reminder.
Adam, you voted yay. Correct? Roland, you voted yay. Christine, you voted yay. I voted yay. That's 4. Mike, Steve, Sahana voted nay. That's 3 nays.
So you
And
can
now we're,
tie us up.
yeah.
now we're up to Christy.
well, and frankly, my aye vote was for 3 to 5% on the municipal budget, not on the.
That is not what we're voting on. We are voting on 3 to 5% of total budget.
Total Acton spend.
Should we start over?
Well, but this comes back to that clarification point of, are we including the reserve that the school is holding, which we should be.
Can you see the screen, Adam?
Yes.
We're voting for exactly what's written on the screen. So if you don't agree with that, then you're a nay.
All right, let me read through this again to make sure I'm clear, because we've had this discussion back and forth a couple times.
Can you change the word on the top line from total Acton budget to total Acton spend, so there can be no confusion about
Whether it's
municipal
the town.
versus total? Is that an acceptable change at this time, or do we need to re-motion?
I don't know.
You can probably re-motion it, make it clear
As amended.
as amended. I guess we have to still, under the rules, we'd have to finish the voting that we have now. And then you could revisit it. You could re-vote it. You could
Come on, guys. This is.
Okay, I'm gonna say nay.
So we need more work on this then. Unless people.
An abstention, so it does not carry.
Right.
Would anybody like to make a counter argument, a counter proposal? Feel free to make changes to the words on the screen and make a motion.
should we table it till next meeting?
No,
No.
Okay.
because our representatives at ALG said that they would have an answer.
No, Jason, we did not say that. We said, if this is ready, I made it very clear, I'm not rushing something to ALG.
That's true. I take it back. You are correct.
Thank you. I'm sorry for my tone.
No, you're completely. You are completely within your bounds. You have not said anything wrong at all.
Any suggested alterations to this policy?
I'll float one idea, that the first line be confined to Acton municipal spending, and we add a line under it to say that we will also reserve 2% of the assessments. I just made that number up, plugging it out of the air, but
Sir, you just mentioned not half an hour ago that you did not like having 2 different metrics for the policy.
yeah, and I don't like double counting reserves either, so I want to get specific about what we're reserving.
And I've been jumping up and down for 3 meetings saying we're double counting reserves.
To be fair, Jason, I have not understood that until today. Just say,
Steve, you were on when the last policy was created. Did any of this conversation come up with that policy, which did include both of these numbers?
We had just as many useless meetings discussing reserve policy. I believe the last policy, and Jason, Mike, you can back me up on this, was the result of policy fatigue.
Well, we're heading there.
True.
That's definitely true, but the whole reason why we had two separate metrics is because we were diametrically opposed as to what to measure against. That's
How about if we remove the word stabilization?
no, sir.
Disagree. We can not have a recommendation for the schools, and then you will still be double counting, but it won't be in your face.
Honestly, that's how I missed it.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm looking at this as my house, I want enough money on hand to be able to pay my bills. And so that would be my entire bills, regardless of whether any savings the school had.
Right. So what they're saying is, say you have a mortgage, and you have been told by whatever entity that you need to have 5% of your total yearly mortgage on hand in cash. But meanwhile, you have an escrow account, and that escrow account has decided that you must also have 3 to 5% of your total mortgage, yearly mortgage on hand. That's the same situation that we have here. You're being told by an escrow account in this simile, the ABRSD E&D, as well as another entity telling you you have to have 5%, 3 to 5% total spend. That is a double count, which is why I've been saying from the beginning we should include it when discussing our level of reserve.
Might be a double count, but we don't have control over who's doing the counting.
I respect. I stipulated that earlier this evening. I respect that we have no control over that level of policy, which is why my argument is we should be at the 3% level, because there is an inherent, automatic, explicit double count.
And I get that, but it doesn't seem to resolve for others the double counting portion.
Well, I'm stuck. If you're going to drop to the 3% level, you're going to have to close down the reserve fund, the stabilization fund, or spend most of our free cash.
Only if you are abiding by the statement that only free cash counts. And Mr. Barrett just said that in their position, they consider both free cash and stabilization to count.
No.
Because you add free cash and stabilization, 5.75 million.
He did.
Christine, I thought the numbers you showed, I'm looking at your spreadsheet.
I know, but I just double checked with Steve, and he said that he's counting both numbers in the finance department's unwritten recommendation for reserves. And so if we're within 3 and 5 and they're within 3 and 8, then we're on the same page for counting both free cash and stabilization as reserves. The argument now is, I think, for a bunch of the committee, why should the town carry 3 and 5% as well as what it carries for the schools, even though the people who are looking and care say that we have to, if we want to stay in good standing. And so, I mean, I don't care about the double counting, because this is what we live with. So we can either put some parameters around it that are understandable and achievable and keep us in good ratings, or we can argue over double counting. And I don't see a way through otherwise.
May I make a request of a fellow member of the committee?
Certainly.
Mr. Noon,
Yes.
granted that you would prefer we pay attention to the total municipal budget as opposed to the total Acton obligation. If it is true that we must adhere to an outside entity's review of the total Acton obligation, are you comfortable with a 3 to 5% range with a ALG and otherwise recommendation to be closer to the floor, given the inherent double counting of E&D?
No, I think 3 to 5% in town of Acton reserves against the total spend is too much.
So you reject the statement from Mr. Mangiarotti and Mr. Barrett that we have to be at 3 to 5% to be in the good graces of the state?
Well, my memory for the last 15 or so years is that we have been well below that target and well above it, but the state never came in and closed us down. So, in fact, if I can go back 15 years ago, we had no reserves. And I don't remember, Steve. What our bond rating was still pretty good.
Yeah, we weren't AAA back then, Steve. We were probably 2 or 3 notches below, though.
Yeah, but we had like zero. We had $50,000 in reserves or something like that total.
Sorry, hold on a second. We had no free cash?
We were living in a different world then. We had no turnbacks, and yeah, we had no free cash to my knowledge. You know, it might have been minimal. We had no stabilization fund, and we were living from override to override at the time.
Yeah, and conversely, there was also a point where we had $9 to $11 million in reserves.
Yeah, and that was, without getting into too much history, we had a enormous reserve set aside for the transfer station that we didn't need. We had, I think it was, $6 million, Steve, something like that. That's what.
Yeah, it was probably something like that, Steve. Yeah, that was a while ago, absolutely.
And it had been set aside for years on the prospect that when we closed that transfer station down, there was going to be an environmental cleanup that was going to cost a lot of money. We were shipping stuff up to a place in North Andover, a wheelabrator, and as it turns out, then we thought we'd be responsible for their cleanup, and the EPA went in, the whole thing was settled, and I don't think we spent much more than $1 million. So we freed up like $5 or $6 million all of a sudden, and then we started talking about reserve policies because then we had some. Now most of that money went into capital, as I recall. But two things. One, you have to think about what's a good policy, and then you have to think about what's the operational impact of some of these numbers. If we set that free cash number ceiling at anywhere near 3 million, then that basically says it's problematic to say we're going to balance a budget any particular year by using reserves. If you set it too high, then the conventional wisdom for many years was you'll never get an operating override passed if you have a lot of reserves. So you're trying to hit a sweet spot. from looking at just the current ALG plan, and I understand it's highly preliminary still. We need to be able to use some reserves for the FY22 budget. Right now, it's showing a $1.6 million deficit. We're using $1.1 million in reserves. We'd have to cut that spending line down to maybe 2.5 or 3% on the operating side, and I don't know that any of the operating entities can do that in a year that we have so many extra expenses. So I don't think we can set that ceiling at a position like 3 million, 3.5 million or something that would cause us to be completely unable to balance a budget in FY22. On the other hand,
you said ceiling. Did you mean floor?
Floor, yeah. On the other hand, if you talk about a ceiling, then you get into questions of have you overtaxed when you start bumping up against your ceiling? And should you be developing more untaxed levy capacity by not hitting the full 2.5? So my problem is I can't separate the discussion of a policy from the numbers I'm looking at on an ALG plan. If this policy goes into effect, what is the impact on this plan? If spending isn't cut, we're probably looking at an operating override. And especially if we limit reserve use. So, not saying I have an answer, but I'm saying we can't look at this policy without assessing its operational impact, both for the next budget year and the 2 years after that. Or, as I've said a few times, recessions tend to be long-lived events for towns and schools. And if we ever needed to have a plan, this is the year we should have a plan. I guess my thought is to go back to poor Steve Barrett and say, when are we going to have a better looking view of the expense levels that we're looking at? Because that would inform just what the impacts of our various policy measures would be. And I'm not talking about infinite detail, Steve. I'm talking, right now you're talking 3.75. Are we still talking 3.75? Are we talking 4? Are we talking 3.5? Or, that kind of number.
Madam Chairman, I believe that the vice chair has a presentation.
Okay.
Just this topic.
But she cannot address what Mr. Barrett was just going to speak to about how close are we to having an idea of the increased number.
Indeed, my apologies.
Yeah, so thank you, Madam Chair. I think, John, we've been meeting with John weekly on budget and other things, and I think his goal was to bring it in, below ALG. I think that's the goal, and we have a 3 point, to use the ceiling and the floor terminology. I think John probably looks at the 3.75 as the ceiling, but I think, like you just said, Steve, there's a $1.6 million deficit that has to be dealt with. So, I think John's been doing this for a long time. So, I think he's gonna work to come in below the ceiling.
Jason?
I request that we table this conversation for a short period of time to go through a separate presentation about the upcoming year budget. And then I have a series of very targeted motions to try and get the sense of the committee.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Madam Vice Chair, would you please go through your next presentation?
All right, here we go. Sorry, hit the wrong button. All right, state of affairs, 5.4% of Acton residents filed for unemployment in October. That's 1,184 people. From 2019 to 2020, the median income for the family decreased by $32,282. And the FY22 budget is projected to be at $109,518,000. An increase in spending of 5.05% from FY21. So that'll translate to a 5.05% tax increase for Acton taxpayers if no action is taken. So with a 5.4% unemployment rate and expecting that to rise over the next few months as COVID continues to shut things down, citizens need tax relief. So we propose a reduction, I propose, in the projected tax increase, and then I jumped ahead by accident, of 1.5 million, resulting in a 3.71% tax increase instead of 5.05%. And now I will tell you how I got there. So the 109 million represents an overall proposed spending increase to 5.05. Municipal increase is 3.75. AVRSD at this point in the ALG spreadsheet is at 4.47. Capital override increase, from last year is 9.97%, and the Minuteman increase is at 24.69%. I gave you some averages for how these have worked out over the last 3 years. So our total reserves, free cash plus stabilization, are $5,854,000. A 3% floor of that amount is $3,243,000. So that leaves us $2.6 million in theory if we count both the free cash and the stabilization together as money that we could spend. 1.1 million is already earmarked by the finance department for capital spending, leaving us 1.5 million available from free cash and stabilization above the FinCom and the finance department's floor. So the restrictions on using this are that the finance department's floor potentially, and there's some confusion on this.
So can you go back one slide?
Sure. Maybe. I can try. Yes.
Yeah, the last sentence is the 10 million dollars. That should just say remaining available reserves. Period. I don't think you need the words above FinCom's 3% floor.
Well, we have
saying it's 1.5 million above their floor.
That is above the floor.
That's above the floor because I removed the floor. I don't even know why that happened. I removed the floor right here, Mike. I took it right out of the equation. So even if we spent the 1.1 million and the 1.5 million, we would still have 3.2 million left, which is the 3% floor.
Okay.
Okay? Because I'm not interested in spending to zero. So if the finance department's floor is simply free cash, then we only have, 3.7 million to spend. If we're counting free cash plus stabilization, it's 5.8 million. So there are restrictions depending on how it's actually counted. And I'm taking that into consideration on this slide, which again, I also emailed this to you guys if you want to look it up in your email. So the options would be for tax relief to apply the 1.5 million out of free cash to the tax levy of 2.5%. So instead the tax levy would only be 0.82%. To spend that 1.5 million out of the stabilization fund, and again, apply it to the tax levy, so it's only 0.82%, or to reduce the projected spending if they don't want to take more out of free cash and reserves, and instead of giving us a $109 million budget, they give us a $108 million budget. All of those things will result in a decrease from 5.05% to 3.71% in the overall tax burden, or some combination therein. And I'm happy to go back to any screen if anybody wants to see the math or the thinking behind.
May I make a comment, Madam Chairwoman?
Yes.
Madam Vice Chair, if you'd go back to the slide where you show the increases for year over year for the 4 different, I believe it's, yes, that's the slide. I would like to propose that we cannot tamper with the capital override increase or the Minuteman increase, because that is past obligation that we have already approved and have already encumbered.
Yep.
Together, that means that the average single family tax bill is already going up by a significant number of hundreds of dollars per family per year. Therefore, trying and reduce one of the other 2 remaining levers becomes that much more important. 5% increase at a time like this, in my opinion, knowing that we've seen this coming for 9 months now, is too much, which is why I am willing for us to go to a floor level of reserves to try and allow for some kind of tax relief. This has the added bonus of generating unused tax levy capacity, which I believe is counted by both the state and the rating agencies when they take into account the economic health of the town. So therefore, I believe this is a very balanced approach to moving forward. Whether it comes out of free cash or stabilization, honestly, I don't care. I think you're going to have a harder time getting a 2/3 vote at town meeting. So I think it's easier to take out of free cash. But if the statement is that that free cash must absolutely be at 3%, then I would lean towards taking it as stabilization, because stabilization was always declared to be for capital, and Lord knows, look at our capital expenses. Line 3 and line 4 are huge, so that qualifies as capital, or rainy day. And if I challenge anyone to tell me that COVID-19 does not qualify as a rainy day event. So honestly, I don't care if it comes out of stabilization or free cash, but I think it should come out of quote unquote reserves to allow for tax relief that is overdue. So, by the way, I like this presentation. I think it does a very good job of summarizing where we should present for the following couple of months as we get into this next budget. I would also like to tack on, if you do decide to take all of the delta out of stabilization or free cash and take none of it out of a change in expenditure, then you are making your following year budget that much harder. If you go back to the last slide, please, Madam Vice Chair, the mix of decreasing spending now and using a little less of the reserves now, so that rather than being at the floor of 3%, but being at 3.5 or 3.8 or 4.0, being offset by the reduction of expenses is going to make the next year's budget easier to fathom. Thank you for the time.
Steve?
Yeah. First, let me say, whoever did this, Christine, did a good job.
It was all Christine.
I helped a little.
Okay. And you too, Christy.
Thank
Um,
My apologies.
no compliments for you, Jason. I'm sorry.
None deserved. None deserved. This was not me.
So, as Jason kind of pointed out, we've both on the town and the school side, we've got the capital override numbers, which aren't going to go down no matter how much we wish they would. And because most of the rest of the operating budget is tied into compensation, at least some of which is already basically determined. Kind of don't remember what the teacher's contract looked like for FY22, but my recollection is they were in the 4% range. Not to get ahead of myself, but the health insurance trust met last week, and our guidance for FY22 was a 5% increase. Though I will be quick to admit that neither Mr. Barrett nor myself voted for that. Well, we voted for it as a compromise, but so getting a $1.5 million out of what's left that is not already committed, either in terms of salary increases, health insurance increases, or capital spending, is going to be tough. I'm not saying it's not possible. I think probably it is, but be prepared for 90% of our budget's already in the books. But Jason is absolutely right. If you don't have some significant component of spending decreases, FY23 looks like you're trying to climb out of a hole. And so, yeah, that's the only advice I would say, is we can certainly adjust some of these numbers. I think it's going to be a combination of everything when all is said and done. But most significantly, I do think that taxpayer relief has to be part of the plan.
The reason we did this is because I wanted to know what sort of number, in terms of tax increase, we would have to do to be able to maintain the level of reserves that it was looking like we needed relative to the policy work. In part to be able to go to ALG and say, okay, either we can suck down reserves or you can limit the increases to this. Because every year we go in and say 3% and then kind of ignore us and go do what they want. So hopefully with coming in this difficult time with some more precise numbers and more of a backing up, it'd be good. Do we think that decreasing the tax increase or limiting the tax increase counts as a taxpayer help?
Well, as taxpayers, we're all entitled to our own opinion on that one. I mean, a lot of people say, well, my tax bill went up. Sometimes it goes up even when the rate doesn't go up. It's a question of valuation, but we're not in a position to make people's average single fact tax bill go down. So by not having it go up as much is a form of taxpayer relief. Even when we built up that untaxed levy capacity, we did it 1%, 0.5% at a time. We didn't even go this big, I don't think. I think we built that $900,000 up over a few years.
General thoughts about these options and any preferences? Again, this is Jason, go.
I would like to ask again, if there's cash or a mix of free cash and stabilization, my recommendation is that there be a mix, because I don't wish to run to the floor instantaneously. My recommendation would be that there be a mix of budget reduction and increased reserve use. Where the reserves come from, I need guidance. Must it come from stabilization, or is it okay to come from free cash? I don't care which one it comes from, as long as the appropriate outside entities are satisfied. I believe this is a reasonable thing to request, because a 5% increase, when we've been averaging 6% increases for year over year over year, after such a large capital override, is warranted, especially given COVID-19 times. So if the taxing entities absolutely cannot find any kind of cost savings, then I'm prepared to go to the floor at 3% of total Acton spend. If they can find some cost savings, then that will only increase the amount of reserve that we hold in place. And then again, Madam Chair, when we're done with this conversation, I have a couple of motions about the reserve policy. Thank you.
Steve,
Yeah, Madam Chair, may I address a question to Steve Barrett?
please do.
Steve, without getting into long explanations of the terms I'm about to use for the newer members, do we have any money available in unspent warrant articles or in an overlay reserve?
So, you know, annually, I think John will do a review of the warrant articles. I think, you know, I don't think there's a ton there, Steve, but I think you'd have to look at that through the manager's office. In terms of overlay, that's the allowance for uncollectible accounts. I think there could be maybe $1 million to $1.5 million on the balance sheet there.
Okay. So these terms, the overlay reserve is under the control of the Board of Assessors, and it's there to give tax rebates, or, you know, when assessments get challenged, they have money available to, if they agree with the petitioner, to reduce money off of their tax bill. Unspent warrant articles are when town meeting authorizes a warrant article. We have 3 years to commence the project, and if we do not commence the project within that time frame, the money then should flow back in free cash. So those typically aren't big items, though in the past sometimes they are. I just think, you know, since things might get a little tight this year, maybe Steve, if you could take a look at those things and see if there's any potential to use them. It would be good to know.
Will do.
Anyone else? I'm sorry, guys, it's getting late for me. I would love when we go into ALG, if it's Thursday or January, to have a little more of a recommendation than we do, in terms of we'd like to see you use it this way or that, unless you all would like us to simply say, here are the options we see, come up with the mix you want.
The other option is to request that they please get us their proposed budgets as soon as possible.
Okay.
I am not comfortable making a recommendation on these options making a motion on these options at this time. I believe we should make some more headway on clarity about reserve policy.
Okay, you wanted to say a few things, Jason?
Madam Chairwoman, I move that all conversation about reserve policy include a percentage of total Acton spend.
Are you saying that every single proposal we have be regarding relative to the total Acton spend?
When we set a reserve policy, I would like it to be as a percentage of total Acton spend. I want to get the sense of the committee. If this fails, I will follow up with another proposal to make the Acton reserve policy be a percentage of municipal spend.
Do we have a second on this motion?
Yep, I seconded.
Okay, discussion? I think we need to have a nuanced, be able to have a nuanced discussion. I'm not comfortable making a firm statement one way or the other. That it has to be towards both. I would frankly be happy. I don't know at this point what the happy would mean, but I would be open to considering a floor relative to one number and a ceiling relative to another, as we did before.
Respectfully, that's what we had before, and I've heard from multiple members of this committee that they are not comfortable having two separate metrics for this. That's why I'm trying to nail down the committee on this topic.
Christine?
Yeah, I feel like being out of alignment with the finance department was a problem prior to now, and that I thought one of our objectives was to get closer to alignment with the finance department so that when we made recommendations, they actually had a chance of being able to comply with them or follow them or at least take guidance from them. So if they are doing total Acton spending on their policy, I think we should do total Acton spending on our policy.
I need to move. My battery is dying.
I experienced that on a certification exam on Friday.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear any of that.
Anyone else want to comment before we vote on this? I see no hands, Madam Chair.
Okay, so we're saying we're going to entirely limit our discussion. Let's go ahead and vote. Christine?
Aye.
Sorry, clarify one more time. We are saying that all policy discussion that we consider at this point will be relative to total Acton spend.
That is correct, Madam Chairwoman.
All right, Steve?
No.
Jason?
Aye.
Mike?
No.
Roland?
No.
Sahana?
No.
Isha?
I thought I didn't have a vote.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, but you can share your opinion. You don't
Aye.
have to. Dave? Not sure Dave's available, so we'll put him
Right,
as,
putting the kids to bed.
Yeah.
He's asleep with them.
yeah, which sounds pretty good. Adam?
I shall abstain.
Okay, and I say nay. Jason, you want to make your next?
Chairwoman, I propose that all conversation of our reserve policy should revolve strictly around municipal spend.
Second? I do not hear a second.
I second that.
Okay, thank you. Christine?
Nay.
Mike?
I would say yes.
Steve?
Nay.
Jason?
Nay.
Roland?
Nay.
Sahana?
I'll abstain.
Isha, do you want to share an opinion?
Nay.
Dave? Okay, not there. I'm guessing Adam.
I will abstain again.
I say nay.
Madam Chairwoman,
Yes.
I propose that we return to our previous policy of having a mix of two separate metrics for determining a reserve policy. Those percentages to be determined at a later time.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Christine.
It's okay.
Mike. I'm sorry,
Sure.
does anyone want to have any debate about this?
What was
I'm gonna-
Christine's vote?
It was okay.
Okay. I'm gonna say that this seems silly to me that we are limiting our discussion. I know everyone's tired.
Madam Chairman, I'm trying to understand the sense of the committee, and I'm trying to give extremely granular votes, very extremely granular topics for us to vote upon, to try and suss out the sense of the committee.
So what was the motion again?
The motion is that we will have two separate metrics, one revolving around municipal spend and one revolving around total spend.
Presumably municipal spend being the floor. Being the smaller number.
I'm not ready to make that presumption.
I'm just,
trying to drive home the fact that we are, after many conversations, coming right back to where we started with.
I think we're in the middle of a vote and we kind of have to finish it.
No, we're talking about it.
we're in the debate phase.
But we started voting.
Yeah.
We got
should
3
have.
votes in and then went back to debate. Can we do
No,
that?
you're the only one who voted.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Steve, did you vote? I'm sorry. Are we done with debate?
I didn't vote. I'll vote aye.
Okay, Jason,
Aye.
Sahana,
I'm abstaining.
Mike, I'm sorry. I couldn't even remember your name at this point.
Yeah, this George here. George votes nay.
Roland,
All right.
Isha, opinion?
Nay.
Dave, we don't know, I presume. Adam,
I vote aye.
all right, I vote nay.
Motion carries.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ayes, 2 nays, 2 abstentions.
Can I change my vote or is it too late?
I don't know.
It was just a sense of the committee, Sahana. So.
Well, it was a formal motion, sir.
Oh, that's fine. I'll just stay where I am right now.
I would like to recommend that we table this discussion. I don't want to make this decision because we're tired of
Second.
talking.
Let's vote.
I think that's within the chair's prerogatives.
Well, we don't have to
I
vote.
think it is so tabled.
She can just vote. She can just say we're done with this topic anytime she pleases.
Okay. I'm tired. I know my brain's not firing on all cylinders. I am inclined at this point to tell ALG that we will not present our reserve policy on Thursday, and that we will return to this later this month and present it to them in January. Now, we are supposed to go over the point of view, but I believe that was in the hopes that we would have an updated policy to present. Is there anything else we should talk about in that, Christine?
Nope.
Okay, our next scheduled meeting would be on December 22nd. Would we like to have that happen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's we can keep it shorter than tonight.
God, I hope so.
Motion, adjourn.
I'm sorry, what?
Motion to adjourn.
Well, hold on. We have a set of minutes we need to vote on.
Move to approve the minute.
Second.
I did an amendment to Christie. Did you see that?
I did not see that, I'm sorry.
It was in regards to Isha's background of, what was your education, Isha? I'm sorry.
I have a PhD,
In,
Oh, molecular biology.
molecular and cell biology.
It said biologist.
yeah, so I changed it to biology, so now you should change it to molecular and cell biology.
As amended.
Second.
And we got seconded.
Second.
All right. Christine,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Sahana,
Aye.
Mike,
Yes.
Roland,
Aye.
Isha,
Abstain.
Dave,
Aye.
Adam.
Aye.
Right, and I say aye. Thank you. That is good. Does anyone have any committee reports they'd like to share at this point?
I will mail a committee report on the school committee's doings to the committee.
So the Board of Selectmen met last night, and you all have the update from the chair. So there's nothing more that I want to add there.
Jason?
The school building committee reports that they are over budget with regard to contingency, but that the trade bids have come in to the upside, and they expect the non-trade bids to come into the upside as well. The guaranteed maximum price will be determined in our meeting. At this time, there is no reason for concern, although I'm always concerned. Thank you.
Steve, do you want to give us a quick health insurance trust?
We met. The experience starting on July 1st has been pretty negative. Claims are running way ahead the same period in prior years. At this point, we don't know whether that's just the making up for the fact that they ran well under for the spring period due to COVID. But yeah, they're running like 16% ahead. We don't expect that to continue, but it does cause us to be somewhat cautious about projecting for next year. We also were informed that the additional expenses that were incurred for COVID related stuff will not be covered by the CARES Act money. So that was a bit of bad news. We had an informal discussion about guidance for rate setting, and we came up as a consensus at 5%. We agreed we would not go higher than that when the budget had to be finalized. We withhold the right to go lower, but we decided to, since we had so many unknowns, to be fairly conservative in our rate setting guidance at this time.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Isha, do you have a motion for us?
I motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All right. Christine?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Sahana?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Roland?
Aye.
Isha?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
All right. And I say aye. Thank you, everyone. Good night. I'll see you on the 22nd.
Thank you.
Good night.